Hello, good evening, and welcome to this joint NCLA and Poetry Book Society showcase event with the wonderful poets Jen Hadfield and Rowan Ricardo Phillips. My name is John Challis, and I'm a research associate with Newcastle Centre for the Literary Arts, and I'm delighted to be hosting this evening's event. Both poets will read from their new collections for around 15 minutes, and this will be followed by a discussion with myself and a Q&A from the audience. If you wish to ask either poet a question, you can post this in the YouTube chat at any point during the event. Shortly, I'm going to hand over to Alice Mullen, the manager of the PBS, who will be introducing both poets. But before then, I'd just like to preview some of the upcoming events NCLA has later this spring. Next Thursday, on the 18th of March, the novelist and scholar Natasha Pulley will appear in a conversation with the historian Laura Tisdale to discuss her second novel, The Lost Future of Pepper Harrow, a historical novel set in Japan and described by a critic as blending a stream of steampunk ether science, Japanese historical figures, and a time-defying thriller. After Easter, on Thursday, 29th of April, Charlie Glimmer, the author of the memoir Featherhood, returns to NCLA to host an in-conversation event with the biographer Blake Bailey about his new biography of Philip Roth. Then on Thursday, 6th of May, the novelist Niven Govindan joins Preti Taneja to discuss Diary of a Film, which is a novel about cinema, flaneurs, queer love, the creative process and the toll it takes on its makers. But it is also a novel about stories and the ongoing question of who has the right to tell them. And lastly, to bring our spring season of events to a close, on Thursday, 13th of May, we're very excited to welcome the award-winning novelist, John Mcgregor, who will be discussing his new novel, Lean, Full, Stand, with NCLA director Rachel Hewitt, which unpicks the notion of heroicism and explores the human impulse to tell our stories, even when the words fail. All of our events are completely free to attend and will all take place online, but you need to register in advance at our website, and the address for that is ncl.ac.uk/NCLA. Now, this brings me on to our very special event this evening, which I'm very excited to be hosting. But first, I'm going to introduce Alice Mullen, manager of the Poetry Book Society, who will tell us about this evening's poets. So over to you, Alice.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining the Poetry Book Society Spring Showcase. It's a pleasure to be partnering with NCLA on our first virtual event of 2021 together. The Poetry Book Society was founded by T.S.Eliot in 1953, and every quarter our expert selectors choose the very best new books to deliver to our members around the world. We truly believe in the power of poetry to connect people across the globe, now more than ever. And tonight we'll be doing just that, bringing you readings from Jen Hadfield, in a windswept corner of Shetland, and Rowan Ricardo Phillips, all the way from America. We're also launching our Spring Bulletin magazine, and you can find out more about membership and order both books with 25% off at poetrybooks.co.uk. Our first reader tonight, Rowan Ricardo Phillips, is the author of 3 poetry collections and 2 books of essays. He was a finalist of the Griffin Poetry Prize and has won a Whiting Award and several Pen Awards. Living Weapon, our spring recommendation, sings out with social force. Interrogations of violence, racism, and injustice sit alongside love poems of astonishing lyric brilliance. Not who or what you love, but that you love. Poetry, taught and honed, emerges from song and pain, as Rowan reminds us all that words are indeed a vital weapon. Our second reader this evening will be Jen Hadfield, who has published 4 poetry collections and won the T.S.Eliot Prize in 2018. She is a creative writing teaching fellow at Glasgow University and is currently building a house on Shetland very slowly, by her own admission. The Stone Age, our spring choice, offers a neurodiverse perspective on the wild world. Everything from a sea slug to a strimmer takes form and character as Jen inhabits the world aslant, full of fresh green blood and a deep time of standing stones. This is a much needed natural balm which urges us to stand still and see the world anew. Against our ever-present eco-crisis, that last chance clanking of a drawbridge, the Stone Age resonates with quiet optimism. And to misquote, many waters cannot quench hope. So I'll hand you back to our poets and John Challis to chair this evening. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I'm so happy to be reading with Jen, such a fabulous poet, and Alice and John, thank you for hosting us. I'm really looking forward to the conversation after. And Pete, thanks for making sure that the gyres go round and round. I am typically incredibly low tech, but this plague that we're living through has made all of us have much more of a engagement with the technocracy than we otherwise would have. And so I find myself doing things slightly differently nowadays. Usually you'd find me just with my head in a book of poems, whether I was reading them to you or not. So what I'm gonna do is take you through a few poems with a bit of a visual element, and then I will descend back into poems from the book proper. So with no further ado, I'll start with Prelude, which is the poem that opens Living Weapon, which originally appeared in the Yale Review. My grandmother saw it coming and left. I'd already left. It came late and swift, like a tidal wave mistaken for a wave, came not as a note, but as an octave, black keyed and mangled, searching the hospice only to find she'd left without notice. The soul clapped from her body, masked by death, death hiding death from death, and finding no sign of her in the high cheekbones or skin, screwed out on a cough into the evening. In the weeks between her death and being laid to rest, life became COVID-19. Both the living and the dead shared one air. Then the service came, and I was not there. I watched from the safe distance of an app as my mother and uncle, massed among the massed few in a pewless space, made peace with the orphans who'd come to take their place. Looking at them on screen was like looking out at the world through the bars of a cage. And now, high on a slope near Van Cortlandt, the immortelles of perfect pitch sing Ina Harris to sleep. Her shade goes there to listen, bathed in the scent of ilex, palm, linden, kapok. It is Easter and she is dressed in her lilac best and hat her daughter crossed bridge and Bronx and plague to bring to her. She is 2 steps ahead of this pentameter as it follows her through the flexed valley of the shadow of death. This elegy, which, like all of them, is so useless and late. My grandmother saw it coming and she left. This next poem is actually a new poem. It's not in Living Weapon, it's after Living Weapon. It's about to appear very shortly in the magazine Plowshares, which is out of Boston here in the United States. It's an excerpt from a project that I'm calling Lost. What can I call it? I don't want to say that I'm rewriting Paradise Lost, but I'm rewriting Paradise Lost. You could consider it a type of reconsideration. I'm just working with Milton's poem in front of me and extracting things that I wouldn't have written or said, and having an encounter with Milton in this way. I think that the best way to think about it artistically, it might sound like an erasure, but there are no erased pieces. But everything in the poem is from the poem down to the morpheme and in its order. Think of Max Richter's reconsideration of Vivaldi's Four Seasons, in which he worked with the sheet music in front of him and found himself finding within it the figures, the movements, the instigations, the phrases that I guess he found incarnate in his own imagination and working with those. So this is from Lost, Book 1. Of a first disobedience and the fruit of that tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. Sing, muse of heaven and earth, rose out of chaos. Aid my adventurous song that intends to soar as it pursues things attempted in prose and rhyme. Instruct me from the first present with wings outspread, dove-like, vast. What in me is mine, raise and support that. What in me is dark, raise and support that. What in me is dark, illumine. Raise and raise and raise the height of this great argument and justify the ways of God to me. Say heaven hides nothing from view. The deep tract of hell, our grandparents' happy state. Lords of the world who seduced them revolt. Guile, envy, revenge deceived mankind. Pride cast out with rebel angels, by whose aid he trusted to have equal the Most High in ambitious aim against the God. Raised war in heaven and hurled headlong flaming from the ethereal sky, hideous down to bottomless perdition, to dwell in chain fire, the omnipotent arms. 9 times the space that measures day and night, he lay vanquished in the fiery gulf, confounded, though immortal. But his doom, the thought of lost happiness and lasting pain, torments him. His eyes witness affliction and dismay mixed with pride and steadfast hate. At once, as far as angels can, he views the dismal situation, waste and wild, a dungeon, all one great flame, yet from those flames no light, but rather darkness visible, regions of sorrow, shades where peace and rest never come, hope never comes, all torture without end, still urges, sulfur consumed, such eternal justice prepared for those rebellions, their prison. Utter darkness set far removed from the center, overwhelmed with flood and whirlwinds of fire. He soon discerns, weltering by his side, one long known in Palestine, and to whom, with bold words, breaking silence, thus began. And then this is a poem called Romanticism, also a new poem. Late autumn in the orange bronze ranges, and the sky still wet with slaughter. The vote done. dying goldenrod tuning the meadows beige and the flocks of birds that flex the air into one black V after another. Carrying with them the occasional silence that flight coaxes from the chest, throat, and mind, coaxes from the altitude's blue view to me, though the bright air, no matter how clear, is viscous with the virus, not dew. It comes and goes like the heat of the sun, a heavy haze of grand scale indifference to the mazy motion of the river that bends away from the small town nearby. As I raise my window for one final song of summer to leap into my room and chant to my well-funded memory when the window is shut tight and the cold burns as I press my nose against the glass for one brief glimpse of God in this world. What moves in the far-off fade spectrum of the wattage as daylight grows dimmer and that feeling that comes and goes, what is it? I have asked myself again and again, and I want to tell you that it's something else, something new, a cure for this world. So I do, and then I don't, and then I do. And then one last new poem. This one is called Vespers. In the end, there was no summer with her. No bare feet on the dashboard as the road behind us fades into summer weather. No poem of summer, no pics to download. She is the poet. I am the ringer in a robin spring. Oh, what I'd lost sight of. As when you see the sun and linger on it. Retin-A daring the sun to glare it all gone. Would she settle for that song? The music in the darkness. The rings made in a darkness made by closed eyes. The wrong power for the right fool. I would have said, what would I have said? What is there to say? The sun sets like a line of poetry. And then I hope you can all see me again. Like I said, I'm terribly low tech. I'm going to read a few poems from Living Weapon. The first one is called History. History. It's late. History promises you a kiss when she comes to bed. So you say goodnight. You're tired and can't keep your eyes open. So you called it surprisingly early. She, like every night this summer, stays up to watch her shows. Later, she woke you, accidentally, with a light you thought was dawn, but was just the white haze of her cell. You stayed half awake in the lit darkness, thinking she owed you something. A mere kiss, waiting, one eye half open, like the flesh in a shell, sensing a swimmer pass. The light turned off as if it never happened. And nothing came to you because you were owed absolutely nothing. Not even the growing indifference in her voice. Tradition and the individual talent. I wandered through each chartered street till I was shot by the police. Trinidadian triptych. There's a poet as well as a critic in here that some of you might recognize. 1. After Lime on Areopagita Avenue. I'm reminded of that joke that Dante once in exile is giving a reading, and he gets up to the podium and he says, I'm just going to read 3 poems. Trinidadian triptych. These aren't long. 1, After Lime on Aripita Avenue. They're sonnets, actually. The Trinidadian High Court justice drives me back to my hotel. He's a poet. He worries about the weight of the lives in his hands. He worries about the weight of the words in our poems. We've been drinking since the sun isinglassed the ridged blue slope of the Queen's Park Cricket Club, the sinking birds cracking the pitch with their caws. A poem is a canary wincing its way down, a mind lost to time, answered the poem. He is a good man. Our friendship has grown. And poetry continues as it is. Because. 2, Hart and Abercrombie Etude. The old fire station I'm sitting in, near Woodford Square in downtown Port of Spain, is lightly decorated inside by 10 Chinese lanterns swaying in the AC. They dangle down from the ceiling's chipped slats. I have absolutely no idea if this answers your question. I'm where the street Hart and Abercrombie meet. And love of this, in its supreme and singular, is the idea instead of the fact. It's feel instead of what blank finds when blank Googles it. The ambered, pinkish brown soul sung real. You ask as though you don't know what it is. Play dead. Let everything become ISIS. 3, swimmers in the Caribbean on the eve of a referendum. A morning swim with Gemma Robinson, the day we're all set to leave Port of Spain. Hannah Lowe nearby in a pool chair. Sun everywhere and nowhere under light rain. I float on my black back, blazed. So many poems. The sky seems more silver than gray. Gemma emerges and circles back to the edge, toes over the deep end of the pool again. She bends at the waist, hands clasped in prayer, leans forward and dives into the water. Soon, she'll be back in Scotland and Hannah in London, with the referendum ripening and rotting. And Orpheus, who stayed behind, trapped, like the 3 of us. I'm just going to close with 2 brief poems. Homer nods, even Homer nods, even Homer nods. You can be a mother who knows a god, and you can ask him for magic armor, a shield the width of Saturn's widest rings, some helmet in the new or ancient style. Fill your arms with defenses for your child. Take the peacock feather you've been offered and plant it in that helmet's crown, or keep it for yourself to use as a pen. Note, this was the only option you were offered. Stylist or witness. Witness with stylus. So that you'd circle down the drain with death, mourning in either silence or sound bites, surrounded by silence and sound bites. Life like this having been polished to shine in the normal ways things shine these days. A dull lull. The type of insufficient glare we used to call out on sight as useless glow. But now in the new darkness we feel a need for a consolation of presence. As when my mother passed me the soft shield, the breastplate like rice paper, the helmet bright as pyrite can be. We already knew that this was part of the old cycle, that I would die soon without a weapon, and she'd live on. And we do this again and again and again, without ever knowing we were the weapons ourselves, stronger than steel, story, and hydrogen. Here in America, where we wonder, still, after everything that's happened, why anyone bothers to read the classics. And then finally, a poem called The Peacock. Music, for when the music is over, is what a poem is. There's no music in a poem, just the imaginary composer breathing beneath the deep wreck, the curves of that glorious alphabet, resilient as bioluminescence stuck in the seafloor. There's something to it, how poems pretend to sing. As a peacock pretends in the wide span of its plumage that there's no end to it. The far stars of galaxies and its ocelli gaze, gazing, and gaze as one. The first fissions finally arriving at the listener, who makes sense of it sooner or later. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
John's saying, go for it, Jen, so I guess I will. Thank you so much, Rowan, for those beautiful poems. Music for when the music is over. That's beautiful. I'm going to start with a poem called Oh Yay. Oh yay. It always seems like you shout your feelings like a town crier. And I proclaim my feelings like a town crier. And folk don't so much share as ring out their feelings like crowds of town criers, turning this way and that, throwing their chins to the sky to toll with a strong downward clang of the feelings, summons we perpetually serve on each other. As if at the edict of some abdicating king, perhaps a stark bollock naked one, his lieutenant standing nude in the king's name too, armistice and christening, the alarum peal. I feel, I feel, I feel, I feel. So just kick things off with a bit of bad language, that's the way to go. I've got a wee selection of poems from the Stone Age. I was just saying earlier when we were all meeting before the session, quite a few of them I've never said before, so, or just once or twice, or only to myself. So we'll see how that goes. It's very strange not being able to see your audience. So I'm just kind of imagining you all there. Lovely hat in the third row. So this is really a book about language, I suppose, and how we humans try and sometimes manage to understand each other. more and more I'm astonished that we manage to understand each other ever at all. We have so much shared experience, especially at the moment, globally more than usual. And yet we all experience shared experiences slightly differently. So there's a lot of that in this book. But that mutual understanding and that reaching out, hopefully with language, is something that I really wanted to extend to the wild world as well. So I'm going to begin with a poem called Ertfast, a Shetland term. It is either bedrock or a rock fixed so firmly in the ground that you couldn't dig it out. Ertfast. I midwife 100 rocks in a day, red rocks glistening like anvils. Each must be delivered in its own way, uncleaving root-veined fascias. With shocking noise they broach the light, red-cheeked and muddy, marred and birthmarked, leaving in sucking soil the imprint of their darling faces. I prize the sticking children, back-breaking work, but no poor me, although I've been a missionary while you raised your one or two. I have this consolation of strong and silent types, my 100 quiet ones that take to talking late and slow. So once I started reaching out for consciousness in other species, I found myself reaching for it in so-called inanimate objects as well, which is a little easier to understand in a beautiful old implement like a scythe than it is in a horrible, stinky, loud instrument of butchery that a strimmer is. But I'll read you a poem for each of those. I hate strimming, as you might be able to tell. I'm trying to grow a meadow in my Shetland garden, but you do have to mow it down from time to time to make it work. But this is Scythe. Considering my wild yard, you recommend a scythe, except in your tongue it sounded like sigh. It sounded like you said a sigh. In the northern countries, to say yes is a sigh, a kind of swift indrawn gasp, like the trick of swallowing a knife. Times past, folk worked, folk wrote wi' a sigh, met Hurst with a scythe, a kind of acquiescence, the keen edge put on summer, summer tilted to the winter good. It squeezed like a paper cut. The land regrets its violet hood. It's only one way to keep up with time, one beat behind each brief hushed smile. Subtracting from the sward with the singing scythe, I step, I sigh, I step, I sigh. And this is Strimmer coming up. This is one of those, I've tried to write political poems in the past and they've never worked very well. And in this poem, I was just really trying to write about a strimmer, and it became a political poem to my surprise, which I think and hope has more power. I don't know if you'll recognize the politician in it. Probably a kind of a hybrid of my least favorite politicians. Strimmer. Strimmer, you butcher, you a soul are the hardest to imagine. A poor soul, a kind soul, a good soul, easy, soul a deep ladle, soul a ladder. How intimately we tangle with our tools, grafting them into our brains like prosthesis. I'm appalled by your skinny neck, thrusting the flat howl of your face into the meadow's tangle, screaming at stinging nettle, couch grass, clover, sending flying little moth scrap souls. I can't find a thing to admire in you, thrash metal strap-on, whose obsession with yield makes yielding impossible, stumbling onward in evangelical fury, roaring your hateful rhetoric. All small voices drowned out in the carnage, the fresh green blood flying in my face. I'm going to move into much softer, gentler territory now. Nudibranch is a poem with a pun for a title. It's a nudibranch, for those of you who've never met one, is a sea slug, which isn't nearly a beautiful enough name for them. They're very diverse, very gorgeous sea animals. But this is, on one level, a poem about nudibranchs. And aspiring to turn into one when I grow up. And it's also a poem about skinny dipping. So there you go, cheap pun. It's skinny dipping in a rock pool in Shetland too, so it takes courage, I reckon. Nudibranch. I ease my naked body down into the rock pool's closet, clinging to the vertical rocks with my soles, hanging a moment before I let myself fall, slowly as a dim slip that shrugs off its hanger in a deep green changing room, air shouting silently from my struck lungs. I would try on the old clothes to see if they still fit. Dropping to the velveted floor, the seizing onesie of Brillo hair, the sweat sheath that horripilates with urchinous buttons, each breaking wave dousing me of costume, comfortably divested of my name. Perhaps still some permeable notion of self, arabesques of albumin, prongs subliming to tender flame, condensing down to antlers and weed and warm and warm and weed. And I'm gonna move to it's time to move to a poem about stone, given the book's called The Stone Age. Shetland is a place very eloquent in stone. People worry about our treelessness, but we have these beautiful stones everywhere, standing stones and cliffs and erratics and beaches and outcrops of rock, all of which seem very eloquent to me, at least. So Cliff is a poem I've never said aloud before in front of other people. We'll give that a whirl. This is some kind of ongoing joke I have with a friend of mine who came up to visit once on a filmmaking project. And I kept saying, Shetland's not the edge. People are always calling Shetland the edge of this and the edge of that. And of course, I feel like it's the center. And I feel like we all feel that where we live, if we want to live there, is the center. So I kept saying it's not the edge. And we went to the edge of a cliff again. She said, well, what's this? So this is a wee joke for her at the start. Cliff. I say there's no such thing as the edge. You say, so what do you call this? Prancing along it to make your point. A hungover six-pack in a greasy gold bearskin. A hermit black basaltic rainbow. After the rain, the cracks are showing. Bits fall off. It happens all the time. It's as if this whole time I've been dreaming, snoozing in its floating meadow, blowholes booming in bowel and womb, while this hang and fly and stretch and cramp, this sweetly reeking inside-out cathedral has been trembling on its marks, waiting on the day it calves to fizz into the sea in sparkle. I say that kind of thinking is unsafe. Just think of the sound as it slid into the sea, like the love leaving your lover's face. Right voice to say them in. I've come up with Picador with some crazy big font and grayscale to try and give you the sense of being encompassed all round by stone. But this is one I'd like to try saying. It's called Lunar Transmission, and it's very brief, and it's really just wondering what the moon would say to us if she could. And on the page, it's got a sort of a zenith and a drop. I don't know if you can see that. It's quite pale. In all honesty, I must say, I have to admit, to be quite frank, to be honest with you, to be perfectly honest. I've always felt like the moon would give us a partial truth. If only we could hear the rest of it, we might be able to sort some stuff out. So I said this book had a lot of questions about language in it and how we understand each other. And I'm going to read a poem that touches on that. This is called Rhubarb and is for another friend. Just about those conversations that we sometimes have with someone when we know each other so well that you sort of talk at each other and don't really listen to each other, but at the same time you are listening on another level and you're communicating beyond the language in a way. It has a walk at midsummer as its setting. Rhubarb. In winter, low tide comes to the rhubarb box and bears stiff reefs of coral. Midsummer, we rustle rhubarb, lean and feral from its driftwood corral. It's late, but I'm not late, I'm not tired at all as you yearn over the rotting fence. I say, careful, you'll be man overboard. Then you plunge like a pearl fisher into creaking billows, clipping thin petioles with your special knife. In the west, the sky is pink as rhubarb. You say you're not that into sunsets. We hiked the far cliffs as if the night will never fall. My bouquet of rhubarb weirdly heavy, like an armful of water, mille fior. I say, they called him the rhubarb rustler. You say, everything's early this year. You say the rain is good when it's soft. You say it's fine to have children to borrow. Now a bird begins to whistle. The rusty ears creak and swivel. Dim green of the hill is yawning visible, and the little voiced dawn will soon be audible. And did I say how late it is? In the east, the sky is pink as rhubarb. So we trim at both ends these lean, sour, freckled stems, and I say, I'm just so tired. And I'm just gonna finish with one last poem called, I was trying to decide whether to give you a really energetic, upbeat one or more of a lullaby, but I think we're going upbeat tonight. So this is Shadow. A friend told me that Jung said that around about the age of 40, you start assimilating your own shadow. And I thought, oh, it's probably about time I did that. So that's this gesture. So this is where I left my shadow, italic, underweight, stashed like a tuishka in the corner of your kitchen. What in God's name have you been feeding it? Dark plates of hashed hellery, like pie for birds. Long winter of the buried dark. I can't believe my delinquent shadow, fat and glossy, full as a tick. Muddy shadow running amok, shagging this bright rock, the hill, snaps mockingly to attention when I cry, heal. welling bottomless at my foot, roosts in my clavicle, opens its throat. You press on me the leash of my shadow, say, open the granite wardrobe of your breast, fold in your shadow like a warm winter coat. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Jen and Rowan for those wonderful readings just now. They were both terrific, and I was reading along with my copies here of both books, which I've enjoyed reading immensely. And I'm very excited to ask you a couple of questions now, just about the reading. I think what's fascinating about both of these books is that they're very much in dialogue with things, traditions, worlds, pushing at what a poem does or even looks like on the page. In Living Weapon, it's the poetic canon and poetry itself, and how the canon can be challenged, reanimated, lived within the present moment. And I'm thinking of that powerful appending of Eliot's poem, of Eliot's essay rather, Tradition and the Individual Talent, in Rowan's book, but also of the many allusions throughout your book, Rowan, responses to the work of people like Dickens and Stevens and Donne. And then in the Stone Age, it's the natural world that the poems voice and enter into dialogue with, exploring the ways in which we understand each other and shape and are shaped by our environment. And I'm thinking of the wonderful lines from some of the Stone poems. Your tongue was fast forwarded, mine is a dog lick, and because my sentence is lava slow, that are rendered in typographically really inventive ways, and how these lines sort of illustrate the differences in our experiences of time. So this is a kind of very long introduction to a question I have for both of you, really. And I was wondering about how you entered into such dialogues, or whether you found these dialogues that both of your books enter into impossible to avoid. And it's up to you who would like to go first.
Like
I'm going to say that Jen has home field advantage. So
is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure.
Oh, that's a good thing, definitely.
So does that mean I go first or second? Yeah, it's a nice question, that, John. Thanks for it. It's I think it's something I'm always hoping will happen. Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time paddling around in rock pools and sloshing around in the shore in some insulated wellies and looking as closely as I can at the place that the shore and the sea meet. And part of it is just that I love what's there. I love the creatures that I meet there. But sometimes when you're looking closely enough, you have this experience of time and presentness changing, and a rock pool, when it happens, if it happens, and you never know if it's going to or not, can grow to encompass you, and you can shrink, and you can actually lose your sense of the future and the past and be entirely in the present and be small and much more part of that web of other beings. And you can do it without drugs, which is absolutely amazing. So I suppose I'm always looking for that, and sometimes a line or two comes to me through that, and sometimes I use a line or two to try and get to that place. A lot of the time, like many poets, I spend just trying and not getting there, but it's really a desire to escape myself and become the right size again. Like Alice in Wonderland, I think. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that does. That's a really beautiful answer. I love this sort of sense of, performing acts of attention, deep attention, and how that, transforms consciousness in many ways. And Rowan, would you like to say something about the dialogues that you're entering into within your book, and whether those two were kind of impossible to avoid, or if it was something that you kind of channeled your way into?
Yeah, I'll second Jen. It's a fantastic question and thing to think about. But certainly the answer for me would be the latter. You know, my sense of poetry is that you're always having some type of agon with what's come before you, but the trick is to, well, my mind is non-hierarchical. I think the important thing is to try to live that way and to not feel belated. But poetry is made of poetry. Poems are made up of other poems. And if I had the good fortune to spend some time with you all, you know, drinking some tea or going for a walk or dipping in a pool, unquestionably, poetry would leak out into my sentences because they always do. I mean, poems always just kind of pop up and are part of my language. So when I write, I don't deny that impulse. Poetry is how I understand the world, and it reifies for me, you know, the things that the intuitive organs inside of us make that we don't have good expression for other than via poetry or painting or maybe music. But in this sense, it's not terribly different from quotations that you find in music, and not just in jazz or hip hop, but even when you think about the Pogues doing a version of Le Pont Mirabeau, right? We're always in some type of engagement. And for me, it's important not to be programmatic or precious about it. For me, it's just a real feral encounter, right? So if the sun is coming up and I'm in a really good place with the love of my life, I might start thinking about done. But I don't expect any points for that. It's just kind of how the chairs are arranged in my head. So my poetry really is it's a mirror held up to the inside engagements and that kind of constant agon, particularly also because I think that we're inclined to think of the poetry's history as an obligation and as something that we are belated to. It's somewhat akin to when we hear someone say, oh, I've got a great last line of a poem. Now I just have to write the rest of the poem. And I always say, well, why would you do that? Because you've already basically said, I'm going to write a poem where I know all of the lines before this last one are not as good as the last one. It's an engagement in writing poorly with the idea that it will all flourish in the end. And I really don't believe in that. So it's just an engagement with the music of what happens, I guess.
Oh, no, that's a wonderful answer. And, you know, I think it's so important to think about poetry made of poetry. And I think that's, you know, we're all working within language itself and the language that's come before, which is why it's such a, you know, a wonderful, you know, encounter with both of these books to find language remade in so many fascinating patterns and exciting, you know, images that come out of both of your books. I'm just looking at the time and aware that we're almost at the end of the hour, and I do have one pre-audience question, and if there's time, I'd love to ask you some more questions as well. But I just want to make sure this question gets in that someone put into us. And it's a question to both of you, and they're just interested in what topics or ideas you find difficult to write about.
I find that unexpectedly, the topics that I find difficult to write about, or that I would say that I have found difficult to write about, I've actually ended up writing about. And not in the form of like, I will take on that challenge, but they just happen. So, you know, I was born and raised in New York. After September 11th, I said, I'm not going to write a single poem about September 11th. And my first book, The Ground, is kind of considered a meditation on September 11th. And in Living Weapon, actually, one of the final poems, Dark Matter Ode, is clearly a type of, it's kind of got a lot of Frost at Midnight in it, right? I mean, it's clearly a poem where I'm thinking about my daughters. And I certainly remember saying, both before I had children and when my children were very small, that I would not be writing any poems about children. I thought that there were plenty of very excellent poems already on that subject, and that I wouldn't have much to say. But I think that Living Weapon, yeah, has one of those examples. Other than that, I can't really think of any. I would say I find it difficult to write poetry when I'm in Barcelona, but I think that's because I'm also not speaking in English or thinking about it. I read it quite a bit, but when I'm in Barcelona, I really don't write very much. And I'm fine with that. There's a time not to write and just have cookies and cake.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I find writing hard a lot of the time. So, you know, I suppose the not writing amplifies over a long period of time until it becomes needing to write something, and then hopefully I can carve out a bit of time to become fluent in my own language again. And that's just been the pattern that's kind of emerged over the years for me now that I've, you know, this is my fourth book, but it seems to have taken a very long time to produce each of those books. But I would say that without a doubt, anything that I intend to write, it doesn't fly. You know, I spend my life trying to escape my own intention, but I still keep trying because, as I say, I think it's the only way to stay fluent in my language. Short answer.
No, that's brilliant answers from both of you. And at NCLA, we've been for the last few years sort of building up our collection of archival recordings, but also of poets' archives. And, you know, we're always very interested to hear about the practice of writing and how you both write. And, you know, the answers you've just provided kind of, you know, give fascinating insights into your practices. I think that's also a really good place to sort of draw the evening to a close. So thank you to both of you, Rowan and Jen, for your wonderful readings this evening. It's been, you know, a wonderful time, you know, chance to spend this time with your work, to hear you both read, to see a cat jump up onto the windowsill, which is also very exciting. And it's wonderful to hear, you know, hear these poems aloud. I should add that both books are available for sale from the PBS's website. So please do make sure you get hold of them both. And I'd also just like to thank Melanie Birch for organising much of these readings, to Peter Hebden, and to Alice Mullen, of course, as well. But most of all, thank you to Rowan and to Jen for giving us their time this evening and this afternoon in Rowan's case, and for writing these wonderful books. So thank you very much, and good evening, good afternoon.
Much, John.
Excellent.